Hello, fellow parents and educators. Thank you for joining me at Education Evolution, where we are disrupting the status quo in today's learning models. We talk about present-day education, what's broken, who's fixing it, and how. I'm Dr. Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your host and founder of Education Evolution and the Microschool Coalition, where we are fiercely committed to changing the narrative, to reimagining the education landscape and creating learning that serves all children and prepares them to thrive. If you are new, welcome to the podcast. Please subscribe on our website to get it delivered to your inbox weekly. If you've been around a while, have you left a review? Hi, Dr. Wilson. It's so good to have you.
I am so thrilled to be here, Maureen. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes. Listeners, today I'm chatting with Dr. Karen Wilson, pediatric neuropsychologist, owner of West LA Neuropsychology, and founder of ChildNEXUS. Talk about a fierce child advocate. I can't wait for her to share from her in-depth understanding of brain-behavior relationships. Karen, let's start with, what do you think the biggest learning challenge is facing our kids right now?
I think, right now we're recording this in the midst of a pandemic. And I think one of the issues that we're facing right now are that children are really struggling with accessing the curriculum via distance learning for those students who can't actually go back into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a couple things happening. One, parents are seeing up close their kids struggle. And these might be kids who are struggling for the first time or who may have been struggling a little bit. And now that they've had to kind of move into this distance learning environment, those difficulties are magnified. And then we have kids who've had struggles all along. And this pandemic and the distance learning has really just exacerbated the difficulties. I mean, we already know that there's a percentage of kids who learn differently, think differently. And I think that this pandemic has really just shed a light on how these difficulties and the differences in the way brains are wired really impacts their kids' ability to learn.
Absolutely. Wow, that takes me back a long ways to when my daughter was in first and second grade. She wasn't outgrowing that preschool, kindergarten quirkiness, and I had doubts, and the school psychologist had some recommendations for me. Karen, if a parent or a teacher is wondering about their student's learning process, what would you recommend?
I would definitely recommend starting with a conversation with the teacher. And then I often say that you want to validate what it is that you're seeing, because if you're seeing struggles as your child is completing their homework, you want to kind of check in with the teacher to see, is he or she seeing the same thing at school? And for some teachers, they're so overwhelmed, they may not be paying as close attention as a parent might be. So you might even want to check with another person, a babysitter, a soccer coach, who might be noticing kind of zoning out on the soccer field or difficulties interacting with friends in gymnastics or in a Girl Scout group. And so you want to validate what it is that you're seeing. And then what I often tell parents is that if it's pretty clear that the struggles are impacting a child in a number of different areas, then you want to move pretty quickly to getting some type of an evaluation, which is really geared towards understanding why your child is struggling. And I think that is just so important, because without understanding, you can't move to appropriate intervention and helping your child thrive.
I love how you're framing an evaluation. I know there's this whole thing about labels, like a terror that my kid will be labeled, or a reliance, well, my kid has this label. And you're just talking about understanding. And what are the next steps if somebody gets that neuropsych eval? What doors might that open?
Well, what it does is I always start with understanding. It starts with understanding the struggle. So parents often have this aha moment, because prior to that, what I hear from a lot of parents, a lot of educators, is that there seems to be a rationalization of the difficulties that students face. And this rationalization tends to go on for an extended period of time. And you've probably heard it where they say, he's just a boy, she's just
Mm-hmm.
shy, he'll grow
Mm-hmm.
out of it. And parents get that message. And sometimes they even see the struggles as laziness. And what that does is it delays the intervention. So what the evaluation does is it provides understanding. So now you know what your child needs in order to access the curriculum and to be successful. And when I talk about success, I'm not just speaking about academic success, because academics is just a portion of who a child is, right? We want them to live fulfilling lives, not only
Yes.
well academically, but to have great personal relationships, to feel good about themselves, to feel passionate about the process of learning and engaging with others. All of that is part of their development. So we want to make sure that we're tapping into all of those.
I love it, that holistic approach. And I also like what you're saying about getting behind the behaviors with understanding. At our micro school, we often talk about no student comes to school wanting to misbehave, wanting to fail. So what is that behavior telling us, or what is it masking? And we love it when we can collaborate with parents and with see evaluations and have as many tools in our kit for addressing a student's learning profile. So what you're talking about is very compassionate, and it seems really logical. Why do people not say, yeah, I want to get an assessment? I mean, if I have a stomach ache for a long time, I'll go to the doctor. Why do you think there's a reluctance to come and get a neuropsych evaluation?
I think there are a couple of reasons. One, and you kind of touched on it, is the fear of a label. Their fear of finding out that my child has a diagnosis, particularly when you're talking about getting a psychoeducational evaluation or a neuropsychological assessment. It's the fear of what that means, what that entails, what that will mean for my child, and parents just not wanting to label their children because they feel that that will impact their ability to be perceived in a certain way later on. And I think
Mm.
a lot of parents don't even know what their options are in terms of an evaluation. And so sometimes they may even approach the school about an evaluation, and the school might say, well, he's doing just fine, or she's really not that far behind relative to her peers. Or again, she'll catch up. And so parents get discouraged from even pursuing an evaluation because they're getting this message from educators that their child is fine and that it's not something they should worry about, or it's something that can be handled with just tutoring or additional support at school.
Yes, that makes sense. I remember when my daughter got an ADHD diagnosis in third grade, I felt conflicted. I felt sad, like, oh dear. But I also felt relief, like, okay, now that we kind of have a sense of what this is, we can work on strategies. And then again, when she got the autism diagnosis later, it's like, oh dear, and you know, and
Mhm.
guilt and weird stuff that that's really illogical, but then relief, like, okay, I know what we're dealing with. So I hear what you're saying. We will have so many more tools if we can have an understanding of what's going on for these, what's behind these struggles.
Absolutely. And I would say that after parents get over the hump of, okay, this is ADHD or this is something else, oftentimes they will get to that space where there is that relief. And I would say that most parents get there. Some get there a little more quickly than others, but they get there. And then I think probably the most satisfaction I get is when parents come back to me either for a reevaluation or they reach out with a phone call or an email and just say how great their child is doing now that they've had a chance to intervene and give their child the appropriate support. And it's not only the academic improvement that they're seeing. I've had parents say, my child is now confident and he's a leader and he feels good about who he is. And he's no longer
Yes.
hiding in the bathroom at school because he doesn't want to get called on in class. Right. And so
Yes.
there's so many things that can happen for a child when we, again, seek to understand and seek to provide appropriate support.
I love that. Yes, the transformation that can occur. On a different level, can you talk about the impact of chronic stress in children's lives right now?
Yes. And I think that really sheds a light on the mental health challenges that for a long time have not been addressed adequately in many schools. And they've always been there, but I think, again, COVID has just exacerbated some of the things that have already been present. And, the American Psychological Association has been tracking stress levels of individuals and families. And they're saying that, the stress levels are higher than they've ever been in terms of being reported. And what's interesting, it's not only the children who are experiencing stress, it's the parents. And what we
Uh-huh.
know about kids is that they don't develop in a vacuum. And so we've got kids at home who are being supervised, their distance learning is being supervised by overwhelmed and stressed parents. And so it makes it very
Oh,
difficult for kids because they pick up on everything. Right? They pick up on all of the cues that
yes.
were in the signals that we're giving them. So even when we're saying, "Oh, it's going to be fine. This is going to be fun," they can see the expressions on our faces. They can see the worry in our brow. They can see
Uh-huh.
our posturing. They can see all of it. And so they pick up on all of that. And they themselves have realized that how they're learning now is different than how they've learned in the past. They're disconnected from their friends. There's loneliness. There's sadness about the losses and things that they're not able to do. And there's stress about what this means for them, depending on the age of the child. I've had my own child say to me, "You mean we're not going back to real school?" Even though we've had the conversation
Oh.
about, this is a new school year and we're trying to get all this excitement, and was completely disappointed when he realized, going to first grade, that we're not going back to real school, that it was going to be more Zoom classes. So I think there's a loss, and with loss comes sadness and disappointment, and it can create stress. And what we
Yes.
know about stress and anxiety is that stress and anxiety really has the ability to interfere with learning. So you may have kids who've already struggling with learning, with accessing the curriculum. And then when you add stress and anxiety onto that, you're really interfering with the ability to further access their curriculum, because it's very hard to think when you're stressed, anxious, or scared.
Yes. Wow, this is just such an accumulation of really difficult situations, and I know you and I had talked in a previous conversation, even prior to the pandemic, this
Mhm.
whole combination of loneliness and social media, what connection are you seeing?
I mean, what's interesting is that there have been studies prior to COVID about the increase in loneliness of this generation. And you would think that because we have social media and a way to connect with people, that this would decrease the loneliness. And that has not been the case. And so I think that people have realized prior to COVID that social media isn't real connection. And so what our kids are yearning for, and what humans need in general, is that personal connection, that face to face, shoulder to shoulder, hand on hand communication. And that is part of the way that we learn and we develop. I mean, even when we think about the development of children, we often think academically and cognitively, but those skills develop in a social context. And
Right.
so you can't have learning academically without the social and emotional development occurring in tandem.
Absolutely, we're talking about a whole human being.
Absolutely. And you
Ah,
can't tease apart those things, right? You can't
right.
tease them apart. And I'm hoping that this situation will shed light on the need to support the mental health of children and adolescents, and not just support them academically. Because again,
Absolutely.
that is so important for overall well-being, right? It's essential.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why our micro school is in person in the afternoons. I mean, we have to be 6 feet apart. The teachers are kind of frontline workers and nervous about it, but we know kids need these connections and that mental health is a huge part of the picture. I'm gonna pivot here. I'm
Okay.
gonna do a little brag time. Okay. So, like, not only were you graduate coordinator and chair of the Department of Psychology at Cal State, and you still supervise interns and pre-doctoral neuropsychology trainees at UCLA. You speak, you write about brain development and assessment and learning differences and social emotional issues. I mean, it goes on. It's amazing. But then you are also going bigger to serve more people. So I want you to talk a little bit about this amazing resource, the ChildNEXUS platform that you've created in your spare time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it because it really is just something I'm very passionate about. I've been in this industry, in the neuropsychological assessment industry for about 15 years, doing these evaluations with kids and working with families one-on-one. And I just realized that I just needed to have a bigger impact. There's so many kids who struggle. And every year, kids enter the school system, and there's a percentage of those kids, between 5 to 15% of kids, who think, feel, or experience the world differently. And I wanted to reach more of those families to increase understanding of the differences in the way that kids learn, and to give parents resources when you see your kids struggling. Give them resources so they can better understand why their child might be struggling, and then connect them directly with individuals who share our vision of informing, educating, and empowering parents and educators, connecting them with providers who can help their children reach their potential. So that's what ChildNEXUS is. So it's a web-based platform where parents can go to access information, but then they can also directly connect with providers who can provide consultations, who can provide direct services, either educational support services or mental health services to parents and their children.
Wonderful. So I'm up here in Seattle, so my families could access the information. And as long as we're remote, they could even do some remote consulting if it's California based. So there's an application to people beyond the LA area, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. And it's what's interesting. I think that prior to COVID, a lot of our practitioners thought that they were had to have their clients and the families that they work with in our geographical location. And unless you have a license that's rooted in California, what a lot of our educational therapists and speech and language pathologists are finding is that they can reach families beyond California and support them remotely, which has been just so beneficial to so many families who are seeking support at this time.
I love it. And I love that you're constantly playing bigger. That's felt like an important piece in my personal journey too.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that starting this podcast was a way for me to go bigger. And so I hear you're doing a similar thing. Talk to us.
I am. And it has not launched yet, but yes, we are going to be launching a ChildNEXUS podcast. It's going to be called the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning Podcast, as an attempt to just expand on the work that we're already doing with the ChildNEXUS platform to reach more families and really grow the network of professionals who can share their expertise and share information that can really help parents better support their children and help educators as well.
Oh, that's going to be amazing. Podcasts are found time. We can take in information while we're doing walks and doing different things. So for you to add that layer of information and support is just incredible. Karen, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really excited about it.
Yay. I have one final question.
Sure.
If you had a magic wand, what would you bestow upon our wonderful rainbow of learners?
A magic wand. If I had a magic wand, I would make sure that we are doing some kind of evaluation of kids the moment that we see the struggle, and that we are not seeing only one way of supporting them, because kids, they're different beings and they need different things. For some kids, they can do fine with just some accommodations in the classroom, but for some, the whole learning environment needs to be redesigned to support them. And I think that that should be an option for all kids. And I think we need to be thinking broader, and we have to be more innovative in how we provide support to kids who struggle, those who think differently, who learn differently, because in the end, all we want to do is to support their learning, their development, and not everyone can do that in a traditional classroom.
Amen. Oh my gosh, Karen, I completely agree. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Maureen. It's been a pleasure.
Karen does a great job of making sense of learning differences and emotional well-being. In the show notes is a parent-friendly article she's written to help parents unpack a child's struggles. Her steps are clear. Document the struggles, validate with another adult's observations, get an evaluation, and the goal is to understand why your child struggles and then to get the appropriate interventions. With that, make a plan and implement. This makes so much sense. Also, see the show notes for another article Karen has written on executive functioning. I appreciate that Karen looks at the whole child. It feels like in schools, a lot of times we're just focused on academics and state test scores and SAT scores. But when she goes on and says we need great personal relationships, we want kids to thrive, to feel good about their learning, she's talking about all aspects of personal development, not just academics. And I agree. We want to see, are our kids confident? How are they feeling? We want to seek to understand and then to provide appropriate support. She nailed it. A part that always is on my heart and mind is the mental health of our youth. There are so many challenges, and there were before the pandemic. And it's no surprise that our kids, they're studying oftentimes right where we're working under the same roof, and they're picking up on our adult stress. That's not what we want for our kids, right? In the show notes, there's research that unpacks this increased stress. We are experiencing a loss right now, a loss of our freedom, a loss of so many things that we were taking for granted prior to the pandemic. Of course, the stress and anxiety interfere with abilities to learn. We all know it's really hard to think when we're stressed out, anxious, or scared. So see what you can be doing to lower the anxiety. Or I love how transparent my teachers are. They acknowledge their feelings to the kids. Yeah, I'm really feeling it too. And I'm feeling kind of lonely with this going on too. Feel free to be candid and real with your kids. They're seeing it anyhow. And to pretend like it doesn't exist doesn't help acknowledge and move past the anxiety and the stress. I also like that Karen talked about the increase in loneliness. Social media has not replaced human interaction, and yet we're having our kids on screens more and more. It's not the same thing. Social skills develop in a social context, not home alone. Please, please. I know the pandemic limits this, but overall, seek to find ways for your student to have interactions. I know this burning necessity is what's behind my micro school teachers becoming frontline workers. They're not super comfortable being in person in school, but we have social distancing, masks, and they know that many of our students need this social interaction for their overall well-being and ability to learn. So please pay attention to mental health issues and not just academics as our kids are growing up. It's exciting that there's the amazing resource of ChildNEXUS out there. I didn't know about that. So that platform is something that you definitely want to tap in on. And there are monthly newsletters you can get on the list and see what talks are going on, learn about the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast, tap into resources. All of that's in the show notes. We definitely want to take advantage of resources, and we're learning that we can do that so much in this remote context. It's opening a lot of doors so that even if we don't have something in our local area or if there's mile-long waiting lists, there are options. Karen's magic wand is so proactive. Evaluate the moment we see a struggle. Yeah, if we don't understand something, let's get more information. And then, if we identify what the struggle is, to remember there's not just one way of supporting a child. I like that she says, for some, the whole learning environment needs to be redesigned. That makes me think of some of the cool micro schools people are putting in place to look at learning through different lenses. Yes. Thinking broader and innovating. Right. Not all learners can be supported in a traditional model. I completely agree, Karen. What a compassionate, smart, proactive professional Karen is, and such a wellspring of resources she has available for us. So happy we got to talk with her. Thank you for listening today. I know how challenging it is to make changes inside your own school or community. I've spent years working with schools around the world on creating learner-centered programs, and it always struck me how much schools were able to get done with the right tools and guidance. If you're ready to make changes like this in your own school, let's talk and put together an action plan. Visit educationevolution.org/consult for a free 15-minute call, and let's see if we're a good fit for more work together. Education Evolution listeners, you are the ones to ensure we create classrooms where each student is seen, heard, valued, and thriving. We need you. Let's go out and reach every student today. I'd be so grateful if you'd head over to your podcast app to give a great rating and review if you found this episode valuable. Don't wait. Please do it right now before you forget. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Signing off, I am Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your partner in boldly reimagining education.